Hello and welcome to the Reactive Dog Pod. I am your host, Tess Morgan. I am a multi-certified dog behavior consultant who specializes in the treatment of reactivity in dogs. Through my business, Treat Yourself Dog Training and Behavior, I help clients make progress and enjoy life again with their reactive dogs. Join me and my guests as we dive into all things reactivity. We'll explore behavior concepts, talk about real-life training plans and considerations for reactive dogs, provide tips and tricks, and discuss how we can best help reactive dogs and their families thrive. Because reactive dogs are good dogs, they just need a little bit of extra support. Let's get into it. Welcome to episode 1 of the Reactive Dog Pod. I am so excited that you're here and that we're getting started with this podcast. I love working with reactive dogs, and my goal with this podcast is to cover training techniques related to reactivity, discuss day-to-day tips for life with your reactive dog, and discuss the many ways we can help both reactive dogs and their families. Whether you're at the beginning of your journey, you've just adopted a reactive dog, or your dog has just become a bit reactive, or if you've been working on your dog's reactivity for a while, this is the podcast for you. For this first episode, I want to make sure we're on the same page about what reactivity even is, because a lot of people throw that term around, and there's no really concrete definition for what reactivity is referring to. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I would define reactivity so that we're on the same page about the definition. And then we'll talk a little bit about why dogs are reactive and what we can do to help them. So let's get into it. What is reactivity? You may have seen this word thrown around a lot on Instagram, social media, maybe when you're kind of Googling what to do about your dog's behavior, this term reactive dog or reactivity is coming up. It is used a lot in the dog training world, but there isn't often a common definition for what exactly we're referring to when we talk about reactivity. And so for me, I'm going to define reactivity as a dog who is essentially overreacting to stimuli in their environment. And so I say overreacting with quotations, not that you can really see them, but I say it with quotations because to the dog, it is not an overreaction, right? To the dog, any behavior that they're kind of putting out there in the moment is an appropriate reaction for them. It's perfectly reasonable considering how they're feeling in that moment. But to us, especially if our dog is barking and lunging at something that, a dog that's passing them, that's not even kind of bothering them or looking at them, or a person who's just trying to be nice to them, to us, it looks like an overreaction because nothing scary objectively has really happened to the dog. But that doesn't mean that the dog isn't allowed to have a different interpretation of that moment than we do. So I'm going to define reactivity as a dog who is overreacting to stimuli in their environment, whether that's other dogs, strangers, kids, bikes, cars, you name it. Now, when we talk about reactivity, it's a really big topic, and honestly, I can categorize it all I want, but there's never going to be any dog who fits squarely into one category with no exceptions and no kind of individual variation, because we know that dogs are individuals and they don't fit neatly into the different categories that we want them to fit in. However, I do think that categories for reactivity can be helpful for people who are just learning about the behavior and trying to understand what's going on with their dog. And I also think it can be helpful to understand the underlying cause for the reactivity so that they don't look at their dog and think, this dog is just doing this to piss me off or to be bad or to be dominant. And they can see that there's actually an underlying root cause that's creating this barking and lunging behavior. And so when we talk about types or categories of reactivity, typically we're going to talk about fear or frustration. And so when we're talking about fear-based reactivity, really we're talking about a dog who is worried, scared, panicked, just any kind of concern about that trigger in the environment. And so with fear-based reactivity, what we see is a dog who is either unsure or worried or scared of something. and they make a big scene about it. So they're barking and lunging at that thing. And because they're barking and lunging, that thing will then go away. Or maybe their owner is very embarrassed about their behavior and they're kind of dragging them away from that thing. Either way, the barking and lunging has worked to remove that scary thing from being in close proximity to them. And so, and you know what? It doesn't even have to be close proximity. It could be far away, but to the dog, it's too close for comfort. And so, because the dog barks and lunges, and then the thing gets removed, or they get removed from the thing, they learn that, hey, if I want space from this thing, I just need to bark and lunge, and then it's going to go away. And so, they'll do that again. So, it works for them. If you're scared of something and you find a technique that works to give you relief from that thing, then you're going to do that again when you see that thing again. So you can get that relief again. And so that's honestly the most common type of reactivity I see, whether it's completely fear or there's some kind of fear and worry mixed in. It's very common to see reactivity that is based in a dog who is uncomfortable with that thing or in that situation. Sometimes with fear-based reactivity, we see a dog who was not originally reactive towards that thing, but then they had some bad experiences, like maybe they were overwhelmed in a dog park. Sometimes you see a dog who was attacked by another dog, although they certainly do not need to have been attacked to become reactive. Or, they had a stranger who was really scary with them, or they had a bad experience at the vet, and then they kind of become reactive as a result of that bad experience. Sometimes we see dogs where it just seems to be kind of a predisposition for them to become reactive, and we don't have an obvious cause or an obvious experience that created the reactivity. So that's fear-based reactivity. And then we have frustration-based reactivity. So when we're talking about frustration-based reactivity, we're talking about a dog who actually really wants to access that thing. So unlike fear-based reactivity, where the dog's motivation is to get away from that thing as quickly as possible, frustration-based reactivity is about a dog who wants to see that dog, wants to greet that person, but hey, they're on a leash or they're behind a fence or a gate and they can't access that thing. And so what we see is this big explosive reaction of barking and lunging, and basically it's just an output of that frustration that they're experiencing. And so it's kind of the opposite end of the fear of the spectrum from the fear, because we have one side where we're trying to get away from something, and another side where we're trying to get towards something. And in both situations, if the dog is on leash, they're prevented from doing what they want to do. So either they're prevented from getting away because they're stuck on a leash attached to a person, or they're prevented from accessing that other dog or that person because they're prevented by that leash or that gate. And so whenever we restrict a dog's movement like this, we do see an intensity of their reactions to intensify, because they're restricted and they can't do what they really want to do. And so when you're talking about a fear-based reactive dog, you may see a dog who, when they're off leash, doesn't have the same reaction because they have the agency to move away from the thing. And with a frustration-based dog, you'll see a dog where they are not reactive once they make contact with that thing, or once they receive kind of ample opportunity to interact with that thing without restriction. And then if we're thinking about these two categories, like I said, no dog fits neatly, or, some dogs are 100% fear, 100% frustration, but so I shouldn't say no dog, but a lot of dogs have a mix here where we have a bit of fear or worry or concern, uncertainty. And then on the other side, we have, okay, but I'm also curious about interacting with that thing, kind of want to check that thing out. And so when you have these two things together, where we have curiosity and frustration and interest, but we also have fear, we call it conflict. So we have a dog who's conflicted about how to interact with that thing or what to do with themselves when they see that thing. And that, honestly, it looks the same. So a lot of these things, whether it's fear, frustration, or conflict, can all come out in the same way with that barking, lunging reaction. And so with just looking at the dog, we can't really necessarily tell why they're reacting until we dig a little bit deeper. So why are some dogs reactive and others aren't? We did discuss bad experiences. So of course, if you have a bad experience with something, that's going to make you feel more concerned about that thing than if you have not had a bad experience with that thing. We also know that reactivity, or at least predisposition towards reactivity, can be impacted by genetics. So what that means is that if mom and dad or anyone in the family line had this reactive behavior or was more prone to fear, then the offspring will be likely to be more prone to fear or reactivity. The other thing that can be inherited genetically is kind of a predisposition for how resilient you are. And so when I talk about resilience, I'm talking about, can you have that bad experience at the dog park and then kind of come back from it and not escalate in your behavior or become reactive afterwards? And so some dogs can have overwhelming or scary or bad experiences and bounce back, whereas others are more likely to kind of have a big impact from even just one bad experience and push them over the edge into becoming reactive. And we want to remember that reactivity is an emotional response, not bad behavior, right? So your dog is not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. So in addition to genetics, where the reactivity or the predisposition towards reactivity or fear is passed down through their genes, we also have early environment. So this could be at your home when they're a little puppy, or it could be at the breeder's home. So typically when we're talking about responsible breeders, we're talking about breeders who are exposing their dog to a lot of different things in a home environment. So typical house sounds, people moving around the house. Sometimes breeders will expose puppies to, fireworks and thunderstorms and wheel them out for little field trips to experience things. And so if we have an early environment at the breeder's home or at your home where the dog has had good, safe experiences with a lot of different stimuli, we're going to see a dog who, is not guaranteed to not be reactive, but is more likely to kind of come with a good predisposition towards not being reactive. We also, when we talk about genetics, we also want to think about breed. Some breeds are going to be more predisposed towards reactivity. Herding breeds have a lot of reactivity going on. That does not mean that every single herding breed is going to be reactive by any means. There are plenty of these dogs who are not reactive or are not predisposed towards reactivity, but a lot of them are. And so when we have dogs who are bred for certain things, for example, herding breeds, a lot of them, they're bred to notice changes in their environment. They're bred to kind of control their environment. And be aware of everything that's going around so that they can control it. And so if we put that dog into a city environment where they have moving bikes and cars and other dogs and all kinds of stuff going on, that dog is going to have that predisposition to want to control their environment and monitor their environment. And if they can't do that because they're prevented on a leash, or if there's just too many things going on and moving around, that dog can have a really, really, really hard time and be more predisposed to kind of having that reactive behavior. Another example would be a dog who is a guardian breed. So your Maremas, those kinds of dogs, Great Pyrenees, where they are bred to essentially guard their farm or guard their flock and be, pretty skeptical of strangers. So those dogs are likely to have reactivity against strangers coming to their home because that's what they were bred to do. And so if we take that dog and we make it a pet, we have to remember that, yes, we can work against this stuff by socializing them really well and giving them really good experiences, but that genetic predisposition is going to still be there. So those are some of the reasons, without going into too much detail, about why dogs might be reactive to begin with. But it definitely is not completely comprehensive. So there's lots of different kind of factors at play as to why a dog might be reactive and another dog might not be. So how do we help reactive dogs? If you're new to reactivity, I'm going to guess that you've done a lot of Googling, you've watched YouTube videos, you've been following people on social media, and it might feel like there's a lot of information and it's overwhelming. And there's a lot of really good kind of looking techniques and methods out there, but you're not sure what to do for your dog or what's going to work for your dog. And so I want to go through a very kind of general overview of all the little things that we think about when we as reactivity trainers start working with a dog who's presenting with these kinds of symptoms. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to consult with our vet, okay? We want to make sure our dog is healthy, that they are free of pain or discomfort, and that there's nothing else going on in the way of medical issues that could impact their reactivity. Typically, we see that when dogs are in pain or discomfort, even if that discomfort isn't painful, if it's something like being really itchy, that is going to impact their reactivity because the dog is going to be essentially not feeling their best. And so if you're not feeling your best, you're going to be more predisposed towards, overreacting to things that are upsetting you and to being more upset like in the first place. So your baseline is going to be, not as relaxed as it could be. And so we really want to make sure that we're consulting with our vet, ruling out pain, ruling out discomfort, and kind of making sure our dog is in the best place possible to kind of start making progress on this reactivity, and that there's nothing else kind of causing the reactivity that is outside of the scope of training. We may also want to talk to our vet about the use of anxiety medications. Not every single dog is going to benefit from this, but many do. And this is a conversation you will want to have with your vet or a veterinary behaviorist, so that you can really talk to them about their opinion about what might be helpful for your dog. Once you've seen your vet, we do want to put some safety measures in place if your dog has a history of biting, or if they've had any kind of history of reacting towards something. We want to make sure that they are feeling safe and also that our community is safe, especially if there has been a bite or an attempted bite in the past. And so we might do things like train our dog to be comfortable wearing a basket muzzle outside. We might use things like baby gates or crates or leashes, especially if your dog is reactive to things inside, like visitors. We're going to have our dog on leash. We are not going to take our dog off leash if they are reactive to other things, unless we are in like a safe, legal, off-leash environment. Often this means something like a sniff spot. I don't know if you've heard of a sniff spot before, but it's essentially like Airbnb for people's backyards and for off-leash spaces for dogs. And we're also going to get really comfortable advocating for our dog. So we're going to tell people, nope, you can't approach my dog. My dog is not friendly with other dogs. Please give us space. All of those nice phrases that can help you create the space for your dog and prevent your dog from experiencing their triggers kind of at an intensity that they're not going to be comfortable with. We also want to ensure that their nutrition is good for them. So talking to our vet or a veterinary nutritionist about whether their diet is working for them and if there could be a better diet to suit them better. And we also want to make sure that they are receiving exercise. If your dog is a high energy dog that needs to run to be fulfilled, then we want to be creative and find ways to give them that exercise, whether it's using something like a flirt pole at home, if your dog is not comfortable going on walks or they're reacting a lot on walks. Like I said, renting a sniff spot or another kind of private off-leash area that you can use, and also making sure that they are receiving mental enrichment. And so that's more than just puzzle toys, right? That's trick training and sniffing opportunities and nose work and all kinds of things that work their brain and help them feel their best mentally. This is going to vary a lot by dog. So all dogs need some type of exercise and mental enrichment, but some dogs, those needs are going to be a lot higher. And you're going to find that if your dog is reactive, you have to get creative about how to meet those needs and still prevent them from kind of practicing that reactivity. We do want to avoid punitive and aversive training methods. I'm not going to go into this a lot now. We may go into this in a future episode, but just as an overview, we don't want to punish our dog for reacting, correct them for barking at things, or you be using any kind of like e-collar, prong collar, choke collar, slip lead, anything like that, because that's just going to make the reactivity worse long term. We also want to keep them feeling safe and protected from bad experiences. And so does this mean physically safe? like, preventing dogs from attacking them and people from touching them. Yes, definitely we want to keep our dog feeling like they're not going to be physically harmed or intruded upon. But feeling safe is more than just that physical kind of barrier between the dog or the person and your dog. Feeling safe is about not having bad experiences at all, ideally, or if you can't control them, or sorry, prevent them from having bad experiences at all, we want to kind of prevent bad experiences as much as we possibly can day to day. We know that if a dog has continued bad experiences with that trigger, whether it's other dogs or people or cars or whatever it is, they're going to continue to react. They're going to continue to practice reacting. The more that we practice and rehearse certain behaviors, the more it becomes a habit. And soon we're going to have a dog who just immediately goes to barking and lunging as soon as they encounter something, almost without even thinking, because it's just a habit that they've developed that when I see another dog, I bark and lunge. We also want to prevent bad experiences because we're trying to change our dog's mind about their triggers, and we're trying to teach them that, hey, you know what? You don't need to react so strongly about this thing because this thing is actually not as big of a deal as you think it is. And so if we want to teach our dog that, we can't be having them have bad experiences with that thing while we're trying to teach that, or we're going to have two steps forward, one step back kind of thing. So we're preventing bad experiences. We're preventing them from practicing the reactive behavior. And you know what? Like, preventing dogs from practicing reactive behavior also includes passive stuff that you're doing day to day in your home. So that could be putting up window film or closing your blinds if your dog is barking out the window. It could be limiting backyard time to quieter times of day or to times when you're out with them, or putting up visual barriers on the fences in the backyard so they can't see dogs or people passing by. And we're doing this because the more our dog is reacting towards things, even if it's just at home, that will make it harder for us to make progress because they're still practicing that reactive behavior. I have a lot of clients who have success using white noise to cover up noises that the dog is reacting to. So we really want to look at their whole daily routine and kind of plug all those holes where they're currently reacting so that we have the best chance of them kind of recovering from stress, having true decompression time at home and getting good sleep where they're not being interrupted by triggers outside. And then also, like I said, not practicing that reactive behavior all the time. Once we've kind of plugged up all those holes and are stopping our dog from practicing the behavior, we do want to then expose them to their triggers because our goal here is not to avoid triggers forever. Our goal is to expose our dog to their triggers in a way that makes them feel safe and where they have enough distance to really kind of learn and be able to engage with you. If you're not giving your dog enough space from their triggers and you're trying to train them when they're closer than they're comfortable with, you're not going to make much progress because your dog is going to be kind of in the state of fight or flight in that moment. And so if we're trying to train our dog when they are worried about that trigger and they're concerned if the trigger is going to come closer to them, or they're kind of like just tolerating the trigger versus completely relaxed, our dog is, they might make a little bit of progress, but they're probably not going to feel that much better about their trigger long term because we're continuing to give them bad experiences. And so what we really want to do is figure out where our starting point is, where we can put our dog in a situation around the trigger and have them be able to be relaxed. For most dogs, that's going to be a really long distance. And so I always say like a football field away. And so that's like a good idea in your head, right, of how much distance you might need. So can your dog stay relaxed if there's a dog that's a little speck in the distance, just big enough for them to notice? And if your dog cannot stay relaxed, even in that really, really, really far away situation, and it doesn't seem like there's any way in, then that's where you want to kind of go back to your vet and talk about how we can help them from a medical standpoint. And then the other thing that we're doing, as well as this gradual exposure at a distance, is we're pairing that trigger with something good. And so we can pair the other dog or the stranger or whatever your dog's trigger is with food. We can pair it with toys sometimes. Anything that your dog really likes is a good thing to pair that trigger with because we want to make a big impression that not only are we keeping you safe around this thing, but we're also going to give you a piece of chicken or engage you in a really fun tug game or fetch game or something that you really, really like so that the dog learns, okay, not only am I safe, but I also, every time I see a dog or every time I see a stranger, something really good happens for me. And so we start to get this change in our dog's emotions where they start to feel like, hey, you know what? I actually am not as worried about other dogs anymore because I never have to go closer to them than I'm comfortable with. And I also get really good stuff when I see them. So maybe I don't actually hate dogs so much. And that's kind of what we're going for. And then the other thing that we can do is we can train our dog to do something else when they see the trigger. So some people will train their dogs to watch them when they see a trigger. Some dogs will train their, sorry, some dogs. Some dogs will train their owners. Some people will train their dogs to, look at the dog on cue or look at the trigger on cue, or check in with them when they've seen the trigger. There's lots of stuff that we can train our dog to do, and we're going to train that outside of the triggering situation first, and then kind of bring it into the triggering situation once that foundation behavior of looking at you or whatever that other behavior is strong enough. And so those are the two main ways that we treat reactivity. I also use something called pattern games, which I'm going to do another episode about. But there's lots of different kind of methods that we use to treat reactivity, but most methods are trained around dog doing something else when they see the trigger and or dog getting really good things when they see the trigger, and everything is always at an intensity that our dog can handle. In addition to doing this kind of proactive behavior modification training where we're setting our dog up to be exposed to their triggers, we also do something called management, which is training our dog to do things like turn away from a trigger, move away from a trigger, eat food on the ground, anything else that they can do when, hey, you know what? This trigger is too close. This is not a training moment. We just need to get out of here. And I need my dog to be able to move with me on cue instead of fixating and barking at that thing. So we have those two kind of training processes going on at the same time where we have the management side where we're teaching our dog that they can do all these other things and avoid looking at the trigger. And then we have this other side where we're actually actively setting our dog up to really work on this trigger. The last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up is your relationship with your dog. So one of the reasons that I don't use aversive, and by aversive, I just mean stuff that your dog doesn't like, essentially, stuff that's painful or stressful or scary. The reason I don't use any of those methods or punish reactivity, one of the reasons is because I want my dog to think that engaging with me is just like the best thing ever, always results in amazing things for them, and that I want them to be really motivated to hang out with me and to play training games with me. And I do that by making sure that I am a reliable source of reinforcement for them. I produce food, I produce good things. I will give them space if I feel that they need space and I'm looking at their body language and telling that they're nervous. They can trust me that I'm not going to force them to go closer and I'm going to create space for them. And so I want to have a really good relationship with my dog and a really good bond where we can communicate with each other, and just be really, really engaged with each other. Because if your dog is not able to be really engaged with you and really enjoy hanging out with you and training with you, then you're not going to make much progress and you're not going to have much of a chance of competing with their triggers. So this has been a very general overview, and I am going to try to go into as many different topics as possible throughout this podcast, so that you're not feeling confused, because I'm sure I'm throwing a lot of information at you and you feel like, oh, like what does she mean by that? And how do we do do that? And my dog can't do that. And how do I put my dog in that situation? And so while I can't give you individual advice for your dog, I will be going into more of these things in detail so that we can really get a good understanding of how we can apply this to our dogs. So I want to thank you so much for tuning into this first episode, and I hope it was helpful. And I also hope that you'll subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any of our exciting upcoming topics. And we're going to have some guests to talk about different topics. And I also hope that you'll share this podcast with anyone who has a reactive dog that you think might benefit from it. So I really want to make sure that we're sharing this information for free with as many people as we can. If you want to support your reactive dog and you think you need a bit more support than just listening to the podcast, I offer virtual group classes, an online membership community just for reactive dog guardians, as well as one-on-one support for reactive dogs and their families. So you can visit treatyourselfdogs.ca. So that's treatyourselfdogs.ca, or click the link in the show notes to work with me. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.